Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of April 16th, 2023. Today we have a special conversation in store for you about the connection between health and longevity and habits of good health and nutrition that could help all of us live longer in a better condition and hopefully arrive at longevity escape velocity in as healthy a state as possible. So joining us today is our panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our current Vice Chairman and Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker, and our Secretary, Brent Ellman. And our special guest for today is Dr. Jonene Ford, who is the founder of Ford Wellness, a health and wellness company specializing in nutrition and integrative health programs and services, whose mission is to help people alleviate and prevent chronic disease, achieve and maintain a healthy body composition, and improve their quality of life. She attained a Doctor of Clinical Nutrition degree from the Maryland University of Integrative Health in 2022, and she was previously a public secondary school educator and taught subjects such as nutrition, food science, health and wellness, and personal development. She has also competed in numerous athletic events. Welcome, Dr. Ford, and please tell us more about yourself and your work and some of what you consider to be the crucial health issues and habits of health that you focus on.
Thanks so much, Gennady, for inviting me. And thank you to the panel, the officers here at the Transhumanist Party. I'm so honored to be here today to talk a little bit about how nutrition can improve health span, which is really a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart. So as Gennady mentioned, I am a Doctor of Clinical Nutrition. I also have a Master's of Science in Nutrition and Integrative Health. And I've made it kind of like my life's focus to help people understand why they may be experiencing the health concerns that they're experiencing, and then also to figure out some natural solutions to those issues. And I don't know that I really connected my passion to health span before I had a conversation with Dr. David Sinclair, and it was a really unique opportunity for me to interview with him. And we talked a little bit about the connection between lifestyle, between nutrition habits, and our ability to be able to live longer, healthier lives. Because I hear a lot of conversation about longevity, but if we can't achieve, I guess, a relative normal sense of health during those years, then is it really worth it? And so that's kind of what he and I talked a lot about during our conversation together. It was very enlightening and kind of led me down the path of, well, how can we improve health span in addition to lifespan? So what I do on a day-to-day basis is I work with people who have chronic health issues mainly, and I help them just kind of prevent those things. And I've found that a lot of the conditions that I am seeing on a day-to-day basis have to do with things that we could change. They're not necessarily genetic in nature, although sometimes they are, but they're lifestyle negative, I guess, maybe negative habits that we've picked up over the years that can be like really easily changed. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of those things and some steps I think that most of us could make to improve our health span without a whole heck of a lot of outside things besides just natural stuff. So the first one is phytonutrients. You might have heard of as phytochemicals, things like that. They're really, nature's way of giving us the medicine without having to really use medicine, I guess, for lack of a better word. So one of the first things I usually advise people to do is to, number one, increase their vegetable intake. And that should be like maybe at least five cups or so per day. But then in addition to that, to expand the number of colors of vegetables that they get, because every single color has a little bit of a different purpose. And two of the colors stand out to me a lot because they are particularly interesting when it comes to thinking of health span, right? So the first one is the red pigment. The red pigment, generally speaking, has a compound called fisetin. And fisetin has in the research been shown to really do a great job at lowering inflammation that can lead to those aging processes. In my field, we call it inflammaging. So inflammation that leads to aging. It's what we consider a senolytic, which basically controls like cells that are causing and wreaking havoc and contributing to aging. So things like red apples, that slogan, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I don't know who made that, but they're pretty smart, whoever it was, because it literally can do that, not just because of the fisetin that can be in a red apple. But for some of the other things, the amount of fiber in it, the fact that it has two types of fiber in it, that can also be very beneficial for reducing inflammation and contributing to overall gut health, keeping our gut microbiome active and normal, which I'll talk about more in a second as well. So that will be my first thing. Quercetin is another senolytic compound that I think is very beneficial when it comes to reversing or at least preventing the aging process. And you can get a good amount of quercetin from apples as well, interestingly enough. And red onions, period. Even a little bit of red wine could be beneficial for quercetin too. But, all in all, if we eat more plants, vegetables, I should say, we definitely can extend our health span in that way. The second thing that I have on my list would be omega-3 fatty acids. So that's been in the news a lot because there's a strong connection between our lack of omega-3 fatty acids in the diet and some of the aging diseases. So like things like Alzheimer's, things like Parkinson's disease. Many of the studies that are coming out and have come out for probably the last decade or so has shown a connection between a lack of omega-3 fatty acids in the diet and the onset of those diseases. And it's not widely known why. My guess, and I think this is kind of like most people's theory, is that a lot of the connections between place to place in the brain involve a myelin sheath, like a fatty substance on those connectors. And when we don't have enough omega-3 fatty acids, then those start to deteriorate. But I don't think that is proven to be 100% true. If it has, I'm not sure about it. But yeah, there's that. So omega-3 fatty acids, you can get that from a supplement probably. But I always try to focus on food first. So things like fatty fish, like salmon. You can also get omega-3 fatty acids from nuts and seeds. Things like that will be very beneficial for us to add to our diets in order to improve our health span. The next thing is, and I guess this is more so maybe a lifestyle thing to consider, but preventing sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a state of chronic muscle loss. And when we lose muscle, we lose a lot of our ability to I guess, regulate our blood sugar. So we think about muscle as like strength and like vitality and things like that. But when I'm thinking about aging, I'm thinking about muscles' ability to be able to help regulate our blood sugar levels. And when our blood sugar kind of goes awry, number one, we do experiencing the inflammation that I mentioned before. But also, they're now calling Alzheimer's disease, that aging disease, type 3 diabetes. So muscle can definitely play a role in kind of, mitigating that or preventing those types of chronic diseases like Alzheimer's, but also, type 2 diabetes, and that which is also considered like an aging disease as well. So I always have my people get on a strength training regimen. It's super duper important for general health. Of course, we want to look better. And so it helps our bodies look better as well, but it does actually prevent aging as well. Let's see, what else do I have on this list here? Oh, so speaking of lifting weights and our bodies looking better, keeping the body fat percentage relatively low. So when our body fat percentage is too high, we kind of go into this state that's called lipotoxicity, which basically means that there's an excessive amount of body fat on the body. And in that case, we have a lot of like inflammation reactions that can assist with the aging process. So, again, things like lifting weights can help keep a body fat low, having a cardiovascular activity regimen, so such as going on a daily walk, maybe jogging, riding a bike, that sort of thing regularly. I usually give my people a minimum of 30 minutes per day of some sort of cardiovascular activity, not just to keep the heart healthy, but also to keep the body fat percentage low. And let's see, the next thing, leaky gut and leaky brain. This is something that I think is relatively new phenomenon in the research as far as like the last maybe 10, 20 years. And I think people are just starting to learn more about it, although I'm sure it's been a thing forever. But leaky gut is essentially when the tight junctions, like the tissues and the lining of the digestive tract begin to become weak. And can let things out of the digestive tract that shouldn't get out, and vice versa. If there's things that are out in the bloodstream that shouldn't get into the digestive tract, things can go back and forth. And those getting out and coming in of stuff that shouldn't be there really wreaks havoc on our inflammation response, and subsequently can wreak havoc on our aging process. So some of the things that I have a lot of people when they come to me do is like, number one, get some food sensitivity tests done or food allergy tests done to see if there's anything that can be triggering those, because leaky gut. So one of the things is we don't really know what comes first. Is it the weakness that comes first and then we're having these reactions, or is it that we're having reactions that causes the weakness? I don't know. But what I do want to do is make sure that we can minimize the reactions. When I say reactions, I mean like, the food sensitivity inflammation reaction. So in that case, I find out what could be triggering some inflammatory responses food-wise, and have the person avoid those things for a period of time. If they're a sensitivity, if they're an allergy, they have to avoid it, ongoing. But when we have that chronic, low level, low grade inflammation that's just there all the time, then, we definitely will have some sort of, aging process to follow it. So that's something that I definitely look into as well. And so another thing, and I have my cup in front of me that I think is really good for preventing aging, which is also senolytic, is green tea or ECGC. Just really works wonders on pretty much every inflammatory process that can happen. And I keep speaking of inflammation as if it's negative. I think there are some benefits to inflammation, right? If we get a break, we break our ankle. Well, we want some inflammation to happen there because that's how we go about the healing process. So inflammation can be healing, but when our body is kind of stuck in a rut where it's perceiving just everyday things as triggers, and we kind of constantly have that low grade inflammation, that's where it's going to be more of a negative issue that can contribute to the aging that we don't want to happen, that could reduce our health span or reduce our lifespan. So I think those are that's the short list of things that I do to kind of help people. Of course, everyone's individual, and so some people may need more or less. I did have one question before we started about COVID long haul, which to me is the perfect example of like the chronic low grade, low level inflammation. So one of my colleagues actually published a paper about COVID long haul and the things that should be a part of the healing process of that. And so I will say that most of it is exactly what I just mentioned, meaning like just making sure that you get the nourishing phytonutrients. Most of us don't get nearly enough vegetables in our diet, so making sure that you get that, especially the ones that are going to be I guess higher on the fisetin quercetin side. So your red pigment, definitely you want to get some of that. Vitamin D was also mentioned in the report, and there's different dosing suggestions for vitamin D depending on a person's health status. But with long haul COVID, generally speaking, around 5,000 IUs of vitamin D was recommended. Omega-3 fatty acids definitely was recommended as part of the healing process of that. Another thing that I didn't mention, but that was a part of their research, was the benefit of interaction with nature. So having like a daily walk outside, being exposed to the sun and also to the sounds of nature has a healing effect on the central nervous system, at least per their research. So that can be also a part of healing from long COVID as well. And then the last thing was vitamin C. They did have each of their participants do 1,000 milligrams supplement of vitamin C every day. And they had pretty good outcomes based on that research. So hopefully that was helpful. And I'm happy to refer you to the research. I don't have it in front of me right now, but for the person that asked, I can definitely shoot you the article if you'd like it.
Yes, indeed. And if you share the report with me or with any of us, I would be happy to link to it in the video description of this salon as well. So thank you very much. You shared quite a few actionable insights for people who are seeking to improve their health, including those who seek to recover from long COVID. And I'm going to address a few of the audience questions and comments first, and then we can go to the panel. So Dowd Sheikh writes that macadamia nuts are a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. Do you agree with that?
I think that all nuts have a pretty good amount of omega-3s in them. I'm not sure of the different amounts from nut to nut and from seed to seed. I will say that macadamia nuts tend to be on the, I guess, with the higher sugar side of the nuts. But I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing.
All right, thank you very much. Now, our friend Luis Arroyo wonders with regard to the apple a day keeps the doctor away kind of advice. Is that affected at all by some of the apples being coated with pesticides? And he's concerned about pesticides being potentially carcinogenic. I'm wondering, though, if you wash the apple carefully, do you pretty much get rid of any of the pesticide that could have been there to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I certainly am a proponent of washing your fresh produce really well. It doesn't have to be like a special type of soap. I know they sell them in the grocery store, but something as simple as water and maybe a little bit of apple cider vinegar can, really do the trick there.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm also curious about the comments you made regarding the role of muscles in regulating blood sugar and preventing type 2 diabetes. And I'm curious with regard to how powerful would long distance endurance running be for that purpose. So that does develop the leg muscles, of course, and if one is moving one's arms, it could develop the arm muscles a little bit, though certainly not to the same extent as weightlifting. But would you say that's enough, or would you recommend for long distance endurance runners also adding a weight training regimen of some sort?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, absolutely. So not only is it beneficial for blood sugar regulation to add the strength training to long distance running, but it also will help your time because the more muscles you have in your body, especially your lower body, the faster, the more power you have with each step. Would it be the same? No. So generally speaking, the blood sugar regulation benefit comes with a contraction of the muscle that only occurs when you're really, I guess, working really, really, really hard. So it's not like, you don't get the same result from a run, blood sugar regulation wise, that you would from getting maybe on a leg press machine and pushing 100 pounds or doing a squat with a dumbbell, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, both are wonderful.
So interesting. You think that anaerobic exercise, where you're working exceptionally hard for short bursts of time and training your muscles, is more effective at blood sugar regulation than aerobic exercise, where you're working moderately hard for a sustained period of time?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
It's an interesting concept because like physiologically, the opposite happens in the moment. So when you're running for long periods of time, generally speaking, like your blood sugar is going to go down because you're using a lot of it. And then even as you're running, like your muscles are releasing more so that you can use more, right? But on the opposite side of that, when you lift weights, usually your muscles like excrete. And so your blood sugar tends to go up like right after a lift. But over the long period, the muscle contraction from lifting is definitely going to be more beneficial for blood sugar regulation. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's fascinating. Now, also in terms of blood sugar regulation, could you comment on how helpful fiber would be? So, for instance, I've seen advertising for Metamucil, which is comprised of psyllium fiber, and it is said to be helpful in reducing the blood sugar spikes that happen with food intake.
Yeah. So fiber is really, it's one of those things that I usually will say to people who do have diabetes or trying to regulate their blood sugar is to make sure that your diet is a high fiber diet because it does help. I can't really vouch for Metamucil all that much. It theoretically, yes, because it's a fiber, it would be helpful, but I'm just, I haven't seen any research on it. And I'm like a food type of person over supplements type of person anyway. But yeah, so whenever you consume something, your body has to do some digesting of that thing before it can do absorbing of that thing. And the harder it is for your body to digest something, the slower the absorption is going to happen. So if you're trying to modify or regulate your blood sugar, if you eat it with either higher fiber food, so let's say you wanted to eat, let's say something that's really easy to digest, white bread, which I would never advise anyone to do, by the way. But let's say you were going to eat that and you didn't want a big blood sugar spike. Well, if you ate that white bread with something that's higher fiber, like maybe an apple, or if you ate it with the protein, like maybe a piece of chicken, then your body's going to have to work hard to digest either the fiber thing or the protein thing, which is also going to make it work hard to digest the white bread. But if you were to eat the white bread by itself, your body can break that down, digest it really, really easy. And subsequently, you can absorb the sugar really easy into the bloodstream. So pairing your carbs with, or making sure your carb foods are higher fiber, or pairing a lower fiber carb with a higher fiber food, a protein, and even some fats can be beneficial in preventing blood sugar spikes.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, would you say the timing of food consumption relative to one's activity also matters? One insight that I had learned from Dr. Bill Andrews, who is also an ultramarathon runner, is that if one eats a sweet, sugary thing essentially shortly before a run or when one is running, that is less detrimental than if one is sedentary afterward, because the physical activity kind of tends to moderate the blood sugar spike.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree with that. So I do work with a lot of athletes, and that's, one of the things that I have them do is eat something that's, number one, going to be pretty easy to digest, because while you're running, let's say a marathon, or, you're playing something that is going to involve like a lot of jumping or whatever, you don't want something heavy in your stomach that you're digesting during that time. So, and also they're going to use it right away for whatever it is that they're doing activity wise. So yeah, 100% agree with that.
Okay, so perhaps people who like these kinds of sweet foods might kind of limit the damage if they also take up long distance running and eat those foods while they run.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I usually tell them that, like, if you like cookies, okay, well, okay, maybe right before you work out, because at least then you're going to use it, you're not going to sit down and then it's just going to be sitting there wreaking havoc.
Right, right. Excellent. And Dowd Sheikh has followed up on his comment. He says he wants to retouch that macadamia nuts are a good source of fats in general. They are not, however, the most optimal nuts for obtaining omega-3s. Walnuts are perhaps better. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, I know. When we think of nuts and seeds, period, so all of them do have some level of omega-3, some more than others. But they're not like, usually when I'm recommending omega-3 foods, I always start with fatty fish, because those are going to be the higher source of them. But I try to include nuts and seeds because, I always have some plant-based or vegan participants who are paying attention as well. The omega-3s that are in them are sometimes, kind of a little bit more difficult for the body to absorb as well and use. And then we have to also think about the other types of omegas in them as well. They're actually usually higher in omega-6s than omega-3s. That's a whole conversation for a whole other day. But yes, I totally agree with the statement, for sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now let us go to some of our panelists' questions. Let's start with Art Ramon.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Jonene. Yeah, I've had the long COVID problems. And one of the things is, people tell me, oh, have you checked this? Have you checked that? Well, my primary has run all sorts of lab work, and he hasn't told me I'm deficient in anything. But I also get referrals to other people who aren't, traditional medicine, and my insurance isn't going to cover it. So is a dietitian probably the best referral? That's something that would be covered by insurance? Would be the best referral to figure out and do blood tests and tell me exactly what I am deficient in or possibly deficient in?
Yeah, and I would say probably one that is well versed in, like on the functional side of things too, because long COVID can be very individual, so there might be a lot of questions to get down to the root of your particular symptoms. And I'm not sure that all dietitians and nutritionists are trained to do that. When I say functional, what I mean is, people who are well-versed in asking the right types of questions to figure out what next steps to take. That's all I mean by that. But I think that would be a good choice for you. Yeah. especially if that could be impacted. I mean, your symptoms that you're experiencing could be impacted or even alleviated by the food that you're eating. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying all sorts of things. I mean, I'm doing everything from red light therapy, chiropractor. I've never been to a chiropractor before, and I just got a consult just last week, so I'm gonna start doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just having to try other things because my primary just hasn't really been that helpful.
Mm.
And the primaries have not been very helpful at all since I first started going to them with the long haul issues. But yeah, I'm definitely trying different things, hot, cold, temperature therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think the stuff that you're doing sounds like, really good. But then again, if those things aren't, if those things aren't helpful to, what you're experiencing, then keep digging. And I'm hoping that you find somebody that can help you out.
Yeah, I've gotten refers to someone, they say they're a COVID specialist, but I'm not sure if my insurance is going to cover it. I think there's some sort of alternate medicine people.
Yeah.
Yes, and I would certainly echo that long COVID is highly individualized and the path to recovery is highly individualized as well. But fortunately, most people do recover based on the statistics. And hopefully that will be the case for all of us who have had COVID and have experienced long-term symptoms in the past. Now, John H. wonders, with regard to your views on intermittent fasting and what type you would favor, if any. And I would supplement that question by also expressing curiosity about what you think the effects of intermittent fasting would be for athletes. So, for example, an endurance runner, of course, has to have some energy source to burn calories, and those of us who have run marathons or ultra marathons know that there comes a point where the body shifts to longer term energy sources, and that shift can be quite abrupt and jarring. It's often called the wall. So is there a role for intermittent fasting in athletes who do a lot of exercise, or would you recommend against it just to make sure that there is some sort of steady energy intake?
That's a great question. So when it comes to any dietary style or pattern, I'm always going to respond with, well, it depends on the individual, right? I think intermittent fasting can be a great tool for people who need it. When we're talking about like mitochondrial dysfunction, or like when we're having like some periods of chronic fatigue, or just feeling like your body is just sore for no reason, that sort of thing, it can be beneficial. In regards to athletes, it really depends on the individual sport. I have not read anything that says that an intermittent fasting style, dietary style, will be beneficial for long distance athletes. That doesn't mean that it might not be, but to me, theoretically, it doesn't seem like it would be a good idea. Yeah, I think intermittent fasting is also really good for people who may have some digestive conditions. And so like gastric rest can be beneficial for some people. And then, sometimes lifestyle can make it a little bit easier. But normally when people ask me about specific diets pertaining to them as individuals, I always say, well, I start off with why. Why are you considering this? And then from there, ask them, is this something that you feel like you could do for the rest of your life? Is that why you're asking about it? But so generally speaking, and I know that was a very vague answer, Janati, but generally speaking, I would say, yeah, it can be good depending on the individual. And it can be detrimental depending on the individual. It really just depends on the person.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is a useful, nuanced answer because it does lead people to consider their own individual circumstances and what they're trying to get out of it. So I am an endurance runner, and there was one day when I tried a 24-hour fast. And I found that, well, starting out about 8 hours into the fast, which essentially began when I went to sleep the prior night, I could do a run and feel all right after, I believe it was an 8-mile run that I had done. And then for the next 9 hours, so up until 17 hours into the fast, I was fine. It felt a little bit unusual, but I could function. And then during the last 7 hours of the fast, I felt that I was significantly low on energy. And indeed, I started to feel lightheaded even because I had burned a lot of calories during the run and I hadn't replenished them at all. I had been drinking water, so hydration wasn't an issue, but I would say that was a bit too extreme for me given my energy expenditure at that time. But perhaps people who aren't running or people who are trying to lose weight might benefit from that to a greater extent.
Maybe so. That sounds consistent with what my thinking would be about IF for long distance runners. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a good idea.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much. And Jason Geringer has an interesting comment in our YouTube chat. He says, I don't know if you could call it being lazy, but he would be happy if somebody just told him what to eat. And of course, there are various diet plans that have people buy like prepackaged meals or have a system where they assign a certain number of points to certain kinds of foods. I would say that is challenging because of the variety of circumstances that one comes across in life. It's even as simple as a social gathering where there are appetizers or some sort of food that's being offered, and then one wouldn't really have a chance to eat or go shopping anytime in the immediate future thereafter. So either one accepts that food or one essentially does intermittent fasting during that occasion. So what do you think of diets that are essentially as prescriptive as saying, well, this is exactly what you're going to eat on this particular day? And is there a better way than doing something that regimented?
Yeah, so I think it has its place. I do write customized meal plans for people because of exactly what Jason mentioned, because they just don't want any guesswork and they want to make sure that they're eating for their body, but they also don't have the time or the energy or just the desire to figure out what that should be, what that eating pattern should be. So I do work for people that would like that sort of thing. My ultimate goal is for people to learn how to make those choices for themselves, though. So I usually start off by saying, yeah, let's do this, but also let's pay attention to the patterns. Let's pay attention to the amounts. Let's pay attention to the portion sizes and things like that, so that you can start to make these decisions on your own. So I think they have a good place. And then, there are some people who have just been doing them with me for years. And it's just because like Jason said, I don't want to think about it. Okay, that's fine. But then, like, as you mentioned, there are occasions where you'll be in situations where you can't eat what's on that meal plan. So then what? So that's where, looking at patterns, looking at serving sizes, looking at, the conversations that we have, because I don't do that without having a virtual appointment with the person to kind of explain, why are we making these decisions? How does it benefit you? How does it benefit your body? And so that's where those lessons will come into play. So where you go out to a business meeting or a family gathering and you can still make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of your individual health.
Yes, indeed. And of course, recently, Brian Johnson has made the news. He is, for those who do not know, a multimillionaire who has at least claimed that he has reversed his biological age by several years. So he's 45. A lot of his metrics are for a person in his early 40s. And his nutrition regimen is quite strict, where he eats the same thing for breakfast and he eats the same thing for lunch every single day. And he at least has assembled essentially a cocktail of nutrients that he believes are optimally tailored for him as an individual for both of those meals. But for dinner, he has a little bit of variation that he allows. So that's how he builds in the variety into his meals. But his situation is a bit different from most of ours because he also has 20 doctors following him around. And if he goes to a social occasion, he can kind of set the terms for that occasion, whereas most of us are not really in that position. But it's interesting that he has kind of developed his own solution to these questions. Now, I would like to see if David Shoemaker has any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question has to do with identifying supplementation. You know, there's lots of advice out there, some of it contradictory about, you know, supplement for this, supplement for that. I wonder if you could speak to something like blood testing, perhaps some other types of testing or analysis, like perhaps from the genome, that might give us clues for supplements that we should entertain and even perhaps help us with dosing for those supplements.
Mm-hmm. There are so many out there. That's a great question, David. There are so many out there and so many companies. And I will say that I'm a little bit overwhelmed with the number. So it's kind of hard for me to give you a really good informed recommendation for one particular company. I'm not aligned with anyone that does genetic testing, nutrient testing, but I will say that there are a lot out there that can be very beneficial. I think that nutrient testing is wonderful. And I think that when you can find a company that aligns your nutrient testing with your genome, then that will be even more wonderful, because then it will be specifically aligned to you and your bioindividuality. So I would say if I had to give you a recommendation, I guess generally speaking, that will be it. Just making sure that they're testing you from a nutrition standpoint. And what I mean by that is, do you have any deficiencies? Is there anything that's lacking? Is there any, SNPs that might prevent you from being able to absorb? When I say SNPs, the term is single nucleotide polymorphism, taking me back to doctoral school. But yeah, are there any SNPs that, any genes that prevent your body from absorbing nutrients the way they should, that sort of thing? And then based off of that information, then they give you recommendations for supplements. I would say that's the way to go. But just kind of like broad stroking, you could be taking things that could be beneficial for one person, but maybe not you because of your bioindividuality. It could be beneficial, maybe, I don't know. So if you definitely have the resources to do that, then that's the route I would go.
All right, thank you. And now let us go to Brent Ellman.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us, being here with us, Jonene.
Thanks, Brent.
Question, yeah, absolutely. Question that I had for you. You were chatting about diabetes, primarily type 2, and you mentioned type 3. But I was wondering if you might have any advice for folks who have type 1 diabetes for dietary options and things like that, supplements that could maybe help mitigate some of the complications or damages that are incurred through the disease over time.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I will say that I'm not a type 1 specialist. I know about it just because I have to know about it. But as far as, giving like general recommendations, it's really hard for me to do. Normally, when I have someone with type 1 diabetes come to my facility, I refer them to another clinician, just because my wheelhouse, I guess my focus area, my specialty area, if you want to call it that, is cardiometabolic function. So anything that involves blood sugar, heart health, things of that nature. However, even though type 1 diabetes falls under that, it isn't considered an autoimmune condition. And so I usually refer them to an autoimmune specialist, nutritionist, or one that focuses more on type 1. So my apologies, I couldn't answer your question a little bit better.
Not a problem. I appreciate it. I had another question as well. When you mention red vegetables, in my mind, I think of peppers and sort of tomatoes, which I know are technically a fruit. I'm just trying to kind of just figure out what are some of these other examples of like red vegetables that.
Yeah.
What was the chemical? Begin with a Q.
Oh, fisetin. Fisetin. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can find some quercetin in some of them, but fisetin is the one that's primarily going to be in your red pigmented fruits and vegetables. So beets would be a good one. Red bell peppers. Let me look at my list of it. Red onions. Even something that we didn't talk about, beans, but even like your red beans, like your kidney beans, would be some good examples of some red veggies. Radishes. Yeah. Are
there correlations to be drawn as well for purple vegetables? Because I think when I think of longevity, I think of purple sweet potatoes and things like that for sure. So I was just wondering if that's another color to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. So there's a lot of research. I actually just read something earlier today about a group that they gave powdered blueberries, but like a lot of it to a group of people. And it reversed, it kind of caused like a senolytic type of reaction, which was great. So blue purple is definitely very, very high in antioxidants and can definitely be very beneficial for preventing or even reversing the aging process. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. But really, all of them are so good. It's hard for me to like put one above the other. All of them just have different things that they are like Superman at, right? So like, even oranges, I don't want to leave them out because they can be highly anti-inflammatory as well, especially for like vision. That's something that I think about, as I get older. I didn't always wear glasses and now I have to wear glasses. I'm like, man, I should have ate more like, beta carotene type fruits and vegetables when I was younger. I don't know. But yeah, so like the whole spectrum of colors really, really beneficial. But I guess when we're thinking about aging and what the research has proven, reds are going to be probably king. And I would definitely agree with you. Probably blues and purples, we kind of lump them together, would probably be second. But that's a really very loose, and that's just my personal opinion. That's not anything written anywhere. All of them are really wonderful.
All right, thank you. Now, our viewer Ampero wonders, what do you think of fake meats like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat?
Great question. So whenever you put the word fake in front of it, I'm probably not going to approve. The more natural we can get something, I think the better. So, minimally processed foods are going to be what I would always root for. So if you're asking my opinion, I would say I'm not a fan.
Well, thank you for that answer. And Ampero also writes, the real problem is that we cannot check our nutrition like we check our emails. And the point that he's making is it sometimes takes a long time to prepare high nutrition meals on a daily basis and kind of assemble them. And a lot of people do rely on processed foods or prepackaged foods that are more convenient. So you could put something in a microwave or get something at a fast food place or a restaurant, but you don't necessarily see everything that goes into it. Or if you see it, it's on the label and half of the ingredients you don't necessarily know about. So how can one approach this in a manner that is sustainable, especially if one is not a particularly great cook? And yes, you could purchase an apple, you could purchase a cucumber, you could purchase a red pepper, and you could eat those. But to actually prepare a meal, that might take more time than many people have.
I totally agree. And there are lots of cool companies out there that will do it for you. Um, I don't want to start calling companies, but you've probably seen commercials and gotten things on your social media feed if you're a social media person, and especially if you follow health accounts, they do a really good job of giving us things that we're following, or giving us ideas or sponsored ads that are similar to what we're following. But anyway, yeah, I would say there's always going to be an alternative. If you don't have enough time, usually what I send my people to are like meal prep companies, or services that can do some of the work for you. So like you can get them to deliver to your door, and maybe some of the stuff is already cut up for you and you just have to throw it in. You don't really have to think about it. Yeah, if that's not, I don't want to say that all processed food is problematic, because most of the foods that we have is somewhat processed, right? I mean, processed just means that something has been done to it. So none of us have ever gone to the grocery store and bought a cow. Usually it's, cut up into pieces. For us, that's a form of being processed. So not all processing is bad, but as you mentioned, Gennady, when we start looking at labels and you're like, oh man, I have no idea what this is, it's probably something maybe we should avoid. So if time is an issue, but maybe money isn't, then maybe some of those food prep companies can be beneficial for you like that, for someone like that. If you're like, I don't want to spend my money on that sort of thing, then I would say maybe reaching out to someone like me, or, a licensed nutritionist or dietitian can be beneficial, because we can give you more ideas, even recipes that might be very simple, 10 minutes or less, that you could prepare. And that wouldn't, take so much time and effort, but that would still be very beneficial health-wise.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thank you very much. And we have another question from Brent Ellman.
Thank you. It's kind of two different questions, honestly. One question, the question about the fake meat prompted me to wonder if you have any recommendations about real meat, if there are any specific types of protein or animal protein, even cuts of meat that might be more beneficial to be eating. I know that I've heard in the past that red meat, for instance, is prone to causing lots of types of inflammation and things like that. And I know that you mentioned getting a large amount of fiber in your diet to help with these types of things that come along with it. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So with meats, I usually try to lean people toward, or I use my word already, move people towards lean meats, lean cuts of meat. So things that are a little bit lower on the fat side and higher on the protein side. So examples of that would be, fish, the white meat of chicken or turkey, leaner cuts of beef. There is some research that links overconsumption of beef to heart disease. So I usually have people no more than, once a week. But now there is some research coming out that maybe says that as long as we eat enough plants, then we don't have to worry about those ramifications, So the research is always kind of changing when it comes to nutrition, which can be frustrating as well. But for now, while we know that, that's usually my recommendation. I usually recommend for people to consume fish or seafood at least twice per week for those omega-3 fatty acids and lots of other health benefits as well. So yeah, I would say those are my primary recommendations when it comes to animal proteins. Did that answer your question, Brent?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the other question that I had on the other end of the spectrum relates more to the plants and veggies and things like that, and supplements. I'm a big supplement guy. I take supplements by the handfuls. I can thank Ray Kurzweil probably for inspiring my interest in all of that. But I've got a good friend of mine who she is very, I'm not entirely sure if I think she's a dietitian, but I know that she is very obsessive about what she eats. And she has this, like, she calls it a bingo board where she puts all these different foods onto this big list and she checks them off all week as she's eating all these superfoods and to try to, stay as healthy as possible and as young as possible. And a point of contention that the two of us have had before that I kind of think that she's right, but, I just don't have enough understanding is the fact that, the superiority essentially to eating, actual fruits and vegetables versus supplements. And something that I've seen in stores and online, of course, are supplements that are, derived from the whole fruit or the whole vegetable versus just simply some sort of extract and things like that. I can't recall the exact term. I know it's something along the lines of compounding effect, where there's all these different things inside of your broccoli that's going to help your body access and, improve the bioavailability and things like that of these different nutrients. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this discussion.
Yeah. So I think, we're kind of trained in nutrition to kind of have the ideology that food is going to be your best option, right? So eating your nutrients is going to be the best option. However, you have to keep in mind a few things. So first is we're not what we eat, we are what we can digest and absorb. So if there's some sort of gastrointestinal something or other going on where the person is experiencing, maybe IBS or Crohn's or whatever, then we know that they are not digesting and or absorbing properly. So supplements would definitely be in their best interest over, well, we want them to eat also, but we know they also need some supplementation. People who are athletes, in the research, supplements 100% necessary because of the rigorous physical activity that they're undergoing. They lose nutrients during those processes. So supplements are 100% beneficial for them, according to the research. And then there's this new idea about nutrient soil degradation in the United States of America, basically meaning that, the vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and whatever else that we used to get from a strawberry 50 years ago is not the same as what we get today because of the difference in quality of soil. And so there are a lot of people in my field who are now saying that most people should take supplements because we aren't getting the same nutrition from the same foods that we ate many years ago. That is relatively new research. So if you're asking me about a science-backed answer, then there you go. If you're asking me about my personal opinion, I am just like you. I have a basket full of supplements that I take on a daily basis. People think I'm crazy because I do. I don't care because a lot of the people that are saying that are people that are dealing with aches and pains, the people that are dealing with like advanced aging symptoms. I'm in my 40s and I'm not dealing with a lot of the stuff that my peers are. And so I feel like what I'm doing is working for me. And that's what matters to me the most.
Yes, indeed. And a lot of people in the longevity field take many supplements. Of course, Ray Kurzweil is famous for taking about 200 supplements a day, but he's a bit of a special case because he has a family history of health issues. So he's in his 70s, and in order to maintain a level of health that's average for the general population, he needs to do a lot more work than the rest of us. He had type 2 diabetes when he was 35, and he claims to have reversed that through his very rigorous supplementation regimen. Now, I'm curious with regard to supplements, does the method of delivery, so to speak, make a difference in the absorption? So, for instance, I take a lot of my supplements in gummy form, so vitamin C gummies, vitamin D gummies, and I'm thinking perhaps because the gummies are more food-like, there might be some benefit to the body's ability to absorb the substances as opposed to taking a capsule of some sort. Would you agree with that, or would you say it's roughly the same level of absorption that happens?
That's a great question, Gennady. And I don't have any research to back what I'm about to say, but I do have, I guess, mentor given, I don't know, was that anecdotal research, I guess. But what I've been advised by some of the people who have taught me through the years is that gummy absorption is not as superior as other forms. And I don't know if it's because of the material of the gummy, and even that varies from brand to brand, but also because of the sugar that they usually include in gummies, which can trigger an inflammatory response. So again, I don't have any research to back that, and it's just something that I've had a couple professors tell me over the years. Now, when it comes to capsules and tablets, generally speaking, capsules are easier absorbed than tablets are, just because the outer covering is a little bit easy for the body to digest and break down once it hits the acid in our stomach. I wish I had a better answer for you regarding that, but I can tell you what my professors have told me in the past.
Yes, well, thank you. That's quite interesting. And what it does suggest to me is that there isn't really a mode of delivery that's totally ineffective, and you think capsules and tablets might even be more effective than gummies. So I wouldn't then just completely discount the possibility of the substance itself, the vitamin or nutrient, being absorbed from a supplement just because of the form in which that supplement is provided. So that's very interesting. Now, along these lines, John H. wonders, should we know anything about the bioavailability of the nutrients in the various foods that you have mentioned? For instance, for the various vegetables or fruits, are there any where the nutrients are particularly bioavailable, or maybe somewhere they aren't as much?
That's a great question. And I would say it largely depends on the nutrient, right? So if we're talking about food, that's a totally different conversation from supplements. But both can have changes in their bioavailability depending on the form that you get them in. For example, carrots, let's say, right? So the pigment in carrots it's called beta carotene, or it's a carotenoid. But in order for us to get the benefit from carrots, we either have to cook it or we have to pair it with the fat because it is carried in fat. So that's a great example of how we could eat it, and then maybe because of our bodies and how we digest and absorb food and what we need the form to be in order to digest and absorb it, maybe we'll have to do something to it in order to make it more bioavailable. So that's a great mention. Just anything that's orange, generally speaking, has that same thing because of the conversion that needs to happen from carotenoid to beta carotene. Now, when it comes to supplements, there can be questions about bioavailability of the different forms of vitamins and minerals in particular, for sure. I do see a question in here. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer that or not.
Yes, please go ahead after this one. So I think that's Brent Ellman wondering any thoughts on liposomal forms of supplements.
Yeah, I think those, so that will be a great form for, let's say, vitamin A. Like there's some things that just are digested a lot better when you pair them with fats. And then you also have like sublingual, supplements. And it really all depends. I will say I'm not a supplement expert, but there are certain forms that I think are more beneficial than others. So generally speaking, if we're talking about capsules, tablets, pills, vitamins, minerals, or whatever. The kind that if you could take it and open it up and the powder comes out, like those generally tend to be a little bit easier absorbed in the body, from my understanding. Even better if you had a powder form or a liquid form of something. Just think, how does my body have to work in order to break this down? And if so, then you have to think, well, maybe some of it's not going to, get through. But if it doesn't really have to do much, then you're probably going to get more benefit from that form. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that's quite interesting. Thank you. Now, there has been a discussion in our chat on YouTube about caffeine and possible effects of caffeine. Now, some people say it's quite beneficial, even a superfood. Others say, well, coffee, which has other elements besides caffeine. Others say that there are some side effects like causing some depletion of calcium in the body. What is your stance on caffeine generally? Is it helpful generally to one's health? Is there a good optimal level of it, or is it generally detrimental?
Great question. I feel like I've been saying this the entire time, but it really depends on the individual, right? So if you're looking at the research, 400 milligrams is supposed to be somewhere around the max. If you're thinking about what that looks like realistically, when I say 400 milligrams, I mean of caffeine. If you're looking at that realistically, thinking of like 2 large Starbucks, like straight up just regular coffee, right? But 200 milligrams seems to be like what's the preferred or beneficial. If there is a health benefit, it tends to be around 200 milligrams per day. There is some acidity when it comes to coffee that you have to consider. But I think that I've read more beneficial things about coffee and its health benefits than not. The only instance where I think that caffeine can be detrimental, or maybe I shouldn't say only instance, but a huge instance where caffeine could be detrimental is in people who have like, AFib or like just heart conditions, maybe hypertension, things of that nature. Then we have to be concerned with caffeine consumption. But outside of that, there have been some very beneficial studies that I've read about caffeine's benefits when it's under or around 200 milligrams per day. When we're going over, I have read some links towards like cortisol, stress hormone raises and things of that nature. And that can definitely contribute to aging, which we don't want. So I think everything in moderation when it comes to caffeine, as long as you don't have a heart condition or some people are very sensitive to caffeine, meaning that they will experience influxes in their heart rate more than most people. So yeah, I would say that it's probably a very individual decision that a person needs to make with their healthcare provider. Generally speaking, it should be okay.
All right, thank you very much. And in regard to stress and the effects of stress on longevity and health, how significant would you say those are, in particular in connection to conditions like long COVID as well, where stress seems to have an effect on the symptoms that people perceive, especially if there's no obvious physical cause to those symptoms. So would you say that there is an optimal level of stress that might be all right, or even helpful as a motivator for individuals, or should we try to minimize stress as much as possible in order to maximize healthy longevity?
Great question. I probably talk about stress every day in practice because I do think that it definitely can contribute to the aging process for sure. I do believe that stress is beneficial in helping us to reduce harm. and to get to from point A to point B, whatever that means for the individual person. But I don't think that stress should be like a continuing thing that we should be experiencing all day, every day, right? So then we have, in that case, a chronic stress issue. And, if we think about, like, I guess the evolutionary reasons behind stress and stress response, it didn't used to be, oh, I have I have a project at work that I have to get done. Like that usually wasn't the cause of stress. Like back when people were hunters and gatherers, stress probably was more so like, oh my gosh, there's an animal that's going to kill me, I need to run. And that didn't happen all the time. But now in our advanced society, we're experiencing these stressors all the time. The problem is our bodies are responding to it in the same way that it did before. So we're having these ups and downs in our stress hormones. And when that happens, we have like blood sugar responses that come as a result of that. And then as a result of that, we have these inflammatory, conditions. So I say all of that to say, I think it's definitely important that each of us employ some sort of stress management practices to our everyday lives. I usually tell people to start every day with some form of, stress management activity, meditation, prayer, whatever your thing is, to kind of like prepare your mind and your body for the day that's ahead. And then at the end of the day, to do it again, but, in a way that helps you to wind down. And to kind of like clear the stress hormone from the body. And then if we can, in the middle of the day, that would be even better. So like, taking deep breaths, going outside for a nature walk, getting some vitamin D, things of that nature. I definitely think that stress can be a silent killer for sure when we have it and it's unmanaged.
Yes, and it seems that people's experience of stress is also what drives some of the suboptimal habits. So if they're feeling stressed or if they're short on time, they might take shortcuts in terms of their diet, or they might not exercise as much as they should. And also they might seek shorter term gratification because the longer term pleasures of life, the kinds that come from achievement or intellectual experience or the experience of beauty, they tend to require more effort, and they tend to require kind of building a foundation for that, whereas shorter term pleasures, be those from less healthy foods or for some people even from substance abuse, they can be realized very quickly, but at a long-term cost. And I think people who are stressed are more likely to lapse into those kinds of habits.
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. So now let us go to Jason Geringer.
Tying back in with that conversation about there not being certain, like what John was saying about bioavailability of certain nutrients in your environment. I had heard. I'm curious if you have heard about the glyphosate study. From what I heard, and I don't know if this is true or whatever. I think it's still being researched as far as I know. But from what I heard, originally they didn't think it would be dangerous to humans because it didn't affect our genomic makeup. It only affected plants. That only plants had this particular gene or something that it affected. But that the side effect was that the plants now are unable to make some kind of protein or something, and it's a protein or whatever it is that we need, and we can only get from our environment. And so if the plants don't have that anymore, we're not getting that. And what reminded me of this was when you had mentioned the leaky gut way earlier. And from what I have heard or read so far, that's part of what it does. It has that protein we use in the structure of like the stomach lining, and it's like some kind of fiber thing, and not having it causes these to be leaky and stuff like that. I'm wondering if you had heard anything about that, or if that rings any bells.
Yeah. So some parts of what you mentioned I have heard about, and some parts are new to me. So I'm definitely going to read the posted article that you put in the chat here. But yeah, I've heard a lot about glyphosate and its impact on just general health. Definitely a strong link between glyphosate and intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And I have also read some studies about its impact on cancer and how it can actually positively correlate with cancer diagnosis. So it's definitely something really nasty there. Like I do feel like from what I've read that it's definitely beneficial to crop production, and so I don't necessarily think it started with bad intentions, but now that we know these things, it's definitely something to look out for sure. And I've also read that it's in a lot of stuff that we don't even really consider or think about. But if you're thinking about boxed food or any sort of prepackaged foods, then you can probably bank on it being in there some type of way, which is kind of scary.
Interesting. Definitely an area to be aware of. Now, Brent Ellman has another question.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is regarding gout. I've kind of something that my father suffers with, and something that I've been dealing with a bit over the last few years, on and off. I try to do what I can with dietary stuff to avoid taking a daily medication like alpurinol. But it's kind of confusing to figure out what exactly one should be avoiding or one should be eating for optimization. I've just heard varying things from different people that seem to conflict very much so. So I was just wondering if you had any recommendations, of course, cherries and apple cider vinegar and things like that. But, what are your thoughts on gout and ways to help control it through diet?
Yeah, great question. So lots of water too. When we're thinking about gout, we're thinking about like you're just having a very acidic sort of environment. So one of the things that we can do to kind of like help alleviate that, in addition to the things that you already mentioned, is making sure that we drink enough water. There's a lot of general, I guess, guidelines for water consumption. 8 cups is, what I hear most of the time, but I like to make it more individualized. So I normally say take your weight in pounds and half it. And then that should be like your minimum water intake every day. So having that, and then also thinking about foods that can be more acidic and trying to minimize your consumption of those things. So, and maybe I should specify things that produce uric acid. So red meats are generally problematic for gout, which is usually why, it's suggested to eat more of a fish and like a low or lean cuts of chicken, that sort of thing. But, if I had to give like general advice, I think that would be it. Now, if you did develop gout, then we talk about, some more strenuous things to do for the diet. But if we're talking about prevention, I'll probably start there. And then, of course, to just make sure that you're eating more than enough veggies every day, for sure.
All right, thank you. Now, I have a question with regard to what you consider to be the relative contribution of genetics versus lifestyle to longevity. And so clearly, without the arrival of some medical therapies that could reverse biological aging, even people with the best lifestyles would still succumb to aging and death eventually. But as I understand it, there's essentially a window of possibility for any given individual that could be affected by lifestyle. So with the worst lifestyle, one would be on one end of that window, and with the best lifestyle, one would be on the other end of that window. But how wide would you say that window is in terms of a number of years, or is it really variable by individual?
I definitely think that lifestyle trumps genetics. And I say that because the research proves it in most cases. So if we're talking about some sorts of illnesses that people are born with, that's one thing, and that's really tough to kind of like change. We can manage it a little bit better, but it's hard to change with lifestyle. But if you're just talking about, things that maybe all of your parents, both of your parents and all of your family had before, or if you're even talking about things that, if you've gone and done a genetic testing and found like SNPs that are say that you carry this particular gene and it makes it more likely for you to develop this, I say forget that. And just, do the things that can prevent those things from happening or even reverse those processes. And now there's with nutrigenomics, like there's so much new data coming out that saying that we can even change our DNA, our established DNA, like the DNA that we already have, which is really, really interesting. I don't know enough about it to speak too much on it, but I find it fascinating. Just to give you an example, I did my genetic testing, and I have genes for obesity, I have genes for diabetes, I have genes for so many things. It told me that I was predisposed to weigh about 190 pounds, like that should be, according to my genes, what I should weigh. None of these things are true about me, but my genes say that they should be, So lifestyle is king, 100%.
Very interesting. And of course, it gives hope to people who at any age would like to extend their life expectancies and hopefully live to see the benefits of future medical advances, because we could affect the probability of us personally getting there. Now, absolutely. I'm also curious, have you noticed any sort of generational shifts in terms of lifestyle habits and their effects upon health, both good and bad? Because for prior generations, there were certain problems in the environment that largely don't exist right now. For instance, lead in paint or lead in gasoline, which was clearly detrimental, and more people in prior generations smoked than people do at present. On the other hand, in the United States especially, a life expectancy has declined, and not just because of COVID, also because of the so-called deaths of despair, where there is more self-destructive behavior, particularly among middle-aged Americans who, for whatever reasons, socioeconomic reasons, have been more prone to substance abuse, opioid abuse, for example. So do you see differences in generational cohorts, and where do you see this headed in terms of patterns, trends in lifestyle choices, both good and bad?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I definitely see a pattern in, I guess, generationally, who is more concerned about lifestyle changes and who is more interested in that. I'm wondering if that's what you're asking. Yeah. So generally speaking, people who are, I guess, in that millennial to Generation X range seem to be really, really concerned about what can I do to prevent these things that I've seen my parents go through or my grandparents go through? I do have a good deal of boomers. I will say that most of them that I'm working with, they want to make changes to their health status, but as part of what I'm saying, a part of them have accepted that this is what it is as well. I'm not sure if that goes or leads to, maybe generationally just kind of just accepting things as they are. But if I had to say people who are really about making changes and understand the benefits of doing that, I would probably see it more in the millennial and generation, maybe even the younger generation Xers. Yeah.
So that's interesting. Do you think that as a result of this, kind of the baseline life expectancy of these younger generations is going to be higher, especially if you exclude people who abuse drugs, for example, or do anything that's dramatically damaging, but people who generally pay attention to their health? Would you say there will be more super centenarians among that population than we've seen in prior generations?
Yeah, if the patterns stick, I definitely would say so. I think we're heading on that trend because I do think that more than ever now, I will say I started in nutrition. I took my first nutrition class when I was in college in 1998, my first year of college. And I will say there's definitely a big difference from the people I talked to at that time to the people that I talk to now. Like, people are really legitimately concerned about their health, and they're concerned about what to do outside of, just disease management. They're not wanting to have these diseases. They're not wanting to manage diseases. They want to be healthy, and they want to live healthier lives. So it's really enlightening for me, and really encouraging to me, because of what I do and what I've made my life's mission. And I'm really happy about that.
Yes, indeed. And hopefully those kinds of encouraging trends will continue. Now we have a question from Art Ramon. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is about MSG. I've read things and it says, oh, there's nothing wrong with MSG. I've tried using MSG in the past to sort of hack my appetite away from, fast food. What are your thoughts on MSG?
Great question. So there are some links to MSG and inflammation. Usually it's in response to some sort of like a histamine intolerance, which is basically a condition where people have a tough time like breaking down and digesting and ridding the body of histamine. So most of us think of histamines as things that basically like are outside, like pollen, dust, or dander, grass. But histamines are in all plants, really, and they're in a lot of substances as well, a lot of animal products too. And so there's that. There have been links to some like hormonal disruptions when it comes to MSG, and there's also some links to like a chronic migraine. But again, I think it's individual. If people are not experiencing any issues with that, and it's a part of their habits, their dietary habits, their cultural habits, and they're not having any negative reactions, then go for it.
Yeah, I haven't had any negative effects from using MSG, and in the past I've used it to try and hack my way away from fast food. Like sometimes I get on this thing where I got to have a Big Mac or whatever from McDonald's, and I get hooked on it, and like I said, try to hack away from it with MSG in my own food that I prepare. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, quite an interesting conversation. And we also have a remark from Mike Lazine regarding the previous subject. He writes, if the younger generation has better access to money and resources, then they will do well. I wonder, though, if time might be a more important factor in this than money, because we all know people who make a fair amount of money, but they're perpetually busy and stressed, and they don't have as much of an opportunity to take care of their health. I would say somebody who makes a moderate income but pays attention to health is more likely to get good outcomes than somebody who makes a lot of money but is just perpetually busy. But what do you think in this regard? Obviously, more money can be helpful in certain respects, even going as far as hiring a nutritionist or seeing a doctor more often, or even for some people having a personal chef. But would you say for most people, even a moderate income would support a healthy regimen, provided that they pay attention to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. You know, I just think it's really encouraging that we have people that are, 22 years old, 27 years old, and they're really making these changes, these lifestyles changes now, or at that age. This morning, I read an article, I think I mentioned this earlier, about people supplementing with, blueberry, dehydrated blueberries, basically, ground into powder. And the study was done on people in their 50s and 60s, and it showed how it can actually reverse the aging process. But think about, like, what if kids started eating a cup of blueberries every day when they were 12? I mean, how much more benefit would there be if they paid attention to it when they're younger? You know, I think I agree in that, just having that attention, and that, like, just frame of reference, like, I should be doing this, will lead them to better results long term, for sure.
Yes, thank you. And do you think there are any societal changes or any kinds of societal infrastructure that could help with that? Because I do see a lot of factors within society that nudge people toward having more stressful lifestyles that focus on immediate urgent problems, not so much about health, not so much about long-term benefits. Do you think anything could change that to make it easier for people to make good choices because they're less barraged with the kinds of influences that would lead them to make bad choices?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like COVID, when we went through that, the whole shutting down of many parts of the country during 2020, I think it opened people's eyes a lot to health, and kind of like put them on that path. I think that was a societal shift for many people. Another thing that I think contributed to this kind of like change toward health is that people had more time because they couldn't go anywhere. And so they were like perusing social media way more than normal. And with the on like the just a huge raising of influencers who are in the health and wellness space, and people having more access to information in that regard, I definitely feel like that has kind of helped with this shift in social media. Period. That's one thing that I feel like, this, when I mentioned the millennials and the younger generation X, the Xers, that's something that generation had that the generation before them didn't. So they had more access to information that was very quick to get. I definitely feel like that was an influence as well.
Yes, that's quite interesting that this could have been a set of beneficial influences from COVID, because, of course, a lot of people have talked about, aside from the obvious harms of COVID itself, the harms of delaying medical care for certain other health conditions. But yes, people did have more time that they spent online and perhaps educating themselves about health. So how those two interacted and which one prevailed over the other. Perhaps that's a question that could be answered within a few years or a few decades' time as the longer term health impacts are better known. So now I would like to go around in the last 20 minutes of our salon and make sure that we give each of the panelists the opportunity to ask one more question at least. Let's begin with David Shoemaker.
Yeah, fascinating discussion today. And like usual, when it comes to health, supplements, diet, it all seems really, really complicated. And I'm wondering, in the news these days, AI is all the buzz, artificial intelligence. And some of that AI can be useful for report generation and a number of other things. I'm wondering, a question to our guest, whether you've considered the use of AI in what you do in your practice and in your work, perhaps to help with documentation or formatting reports for clients, or maybe even beyond that, analysis of diet regimes and so forth. Have you given any thought along those lines?
Yeah, I have. I think it's incredible. A lot of people in my field, when some of the newer technology, especially like things like Chat GPT, and then a lot of the other platforms started doing similar like type of services, they were like up in arms, like, oh my gosh, this is going to take away our profession. And I typed in something like, create a 7-day meal plan for a person who has kidney failure. And the thing that it gave back to me let me know that our jobs are safe. But I do think that AI can definitely be a wonderful, wonderful tool for helping with a lot of different tasks. So in my company, I'm not just a clinician, but I also am, like, I guess, the manager of the company. So I have it do SOPs for me. I have it, create marketing plans for me. It's just saves so much time, and I love it. I'm not threatened by it at all. So that's a great question, though.
Yes, indeed. So you see more opportunity in AI systems rather than risk. And a lot of people within the transhumanist community are certainly of that outlook. Now, Jason Geringer wonders if a company like McDonald's offered to let you design an entire new healthy menu, would you do it? And as a follow-up to that, how would you modify the McDonald's menu from what it is right now, especially given that they do have some salads, they do have some fruits now, so they seem to have more healthy choices than they used to 30 years ago.
If they let me design an entire healthy menu, would I do it? Heck yeah, I would do it. I would love to do something like that. That sounds really fun. As long as they really listened and took my suggestions, I 100% would do it. Now, Jonene, you had a second question or a follow-up question to that, and it just left my mind that quickly. What was it again?
So what would you put on the menu there at McDonald's?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that they have can be fun periodically, like, on occasion. I would just love for the food that they have to be fresh food, and not, just hugely modified. Maybe having buns that were whole grain, or at least giving us the option of having a whole grain bun instead of a refined grain bun. Maybe giving us the option to have a side salad instead of fries. Just little tweaks here and there could go a long way.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. And hopefully this can happen someday, because ultimately fast food companies, they make choices based on consumer demand. And if consumers demand healthier options, they're going to get healthier options if there's enough of a movement regarding this. Now, I have an interesting question. If you look at the statistics for the longest living Americans ever, and you look at the top 10, first of all, the top 9 are women the 10th is a man named Christian Mortensen, who died in 1998 at the age of 115 years and 252 days. But there is also a commonality among most of the top 9. So number 2, Susanna Jones, number 3, Gertrude Weaver, number 4, Elizabeth Bolden, number 7, Geraldine Talley, and number 8, Maggie Barnes. So that's 5 out of the 9. They were African American women who essentially came of age during the sharecropper era. Many of them were children of freed slaves, and they did not have easy lives.
Mm-hmm.
So most of them did not have material wealth. They worked throughout their lives, and yet they outlived pretty much all other Americans. So
Mm-hmm.
do you happen to know what in their lives enabled their exceptional longevity, particularly in regard to any lifestyle choices that they could have made, or any sorts of societal influences that, even though their lives were quite difficult by most people's standards, they still outlived pretty much everybody?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I wish I knew. I mean, I could make some guesses, and I'm wondering, well, first, maybe they're genetically predisposed to living a long life. Who knows? But it could be sun exposure. You mentioned that they were hard laborers, right? They were likely outside for long periods of time, and we can't minimize the impact that the sun and sun exposure has on longevity. So there's that. The fact that they were very physically active for a long period of time, maybe that plays a role as well. And then, sharecroppers tend to work together in groups. And there's a huge correlation between positive relationships, social activity, and longevity. So that maybe could play a role. I would love to know for sure. And then obviously I'll be interested in what are they eating? What was their dietary habits like? That's really interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And Wikipedia has quite a good list of the oldest living people as well as the oldest people in history. And this list of American supercentenarians that I have linked to has details about all of the women in the top 9. So definitely worthy of further study, because that strikes me as a statistical anomaly to see 5 of the top 9 meeting that description, and certainly any habits, any insights that they would have had into how to lead a long life would be beneficial for the rest of us as well. So Mike Lazine writes that he has women on his father's side who lived to a pretty old age, and they were not eating super healthy. So the genetic aspect could be part of that, but other lifestyle factors could have been part of that as well. So I wonder, did they have very robust ties with their families or their communities? Did they have people around to take care of them if they were experiencing health issues? So
Yeah,
definitely quite interesting to consider.
Definitely.
All right. So let us see now among the other panelists who would like to ask a question. How about Art Ramon?
Yeah, I used to do a lot of intermittent fasting, I'd say in my early 40s, and was quite successful with it. But now that I'm in my 50s, it's not working out as well. And I used to use a lot of coffee, to suppress my appetite. Well, now coffee, if I drink too much, it actually hurts my stomach. And then in order to get rid of that pain, eating actually helps. So do you have any tips on how to suppress appetite if I do want to intermittent fast?
That's a great question. I don't. That's so interesting. There is an herb called Garcinia cambogia, which has some links to appetite suppression. Um, I don't know if there are any ties to it being used during intermittent fasting, but it's something that's out there that potentially could be tried. Um, Usually the thing that I mention is going to be some sort of caffeinated beverage. You mentioned that the coffee hurts your stomach. You could maybe try green tea or black tea and see if that feels better.
Yeah, and then if I try to do a multi-day fast, well, then I can't use caffeine as an appetite suppressant because otherwise I won't sleep. And that also becomes an issue as how to do a multi-day fast without using caffeine as an appetite suppressant. And pure willpower, I just can't do it because as I start to get to about the 20-hour mark, that's when I start to get into ketosis, and that ketosis creates a very frantic energy. Well, I'm sure as hell not going to sleep when I got frantic energy because I think that frantic energy is driving me to go find food.
Yeah.
So it's been very difficult for me to try any suggestions, but people say, to do a multi-day fast to get that autophagy effect. I just can't do it. It's just impossible for me at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a proponent of being in tune with your body's cues. So it just might not be a good alternative for you right now. And maybe trying something different for now could be beneficial. Maybe you could try it again later and see. But that's why I say diet patterns are so individual. Because one person can do the thing and get great results and feel wonderful. And then, you have person B who does exactly the same thing and they're experiencing the same things you're experiencing.
Yeah, and like within the past 2 weeks, I've been having some pretty heavy symptoms of long haul, but I'm also noticing an aversion to food in general, not just fast food aversion. I'm having like just the supposedly healthy food. I got a lot of salmon that I can eat that's very healthy, but I don't want to eat it. I'm just having an aversion to food in general, and I will just eat candy just to eat sometimes because otherwise I just don't feel like eating anything else. So, and I know I did that like last week. I went 2 days without hardly eating anything, but I did eat candy once a day for each of those days. And it's sort of this strange food aversion I've developed, and it kind of seems to coincide with increased COVID long haul symptoms. So I'm trying to figure that out.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think it would be good for you to speak with a licensed nutrition professional to kind of see if you can just get a plan together that works well for what you're experiencing, symptoms wise, and then where you want to be. I think that would be a good idea for you for sure.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Now, Jason Geringer wonders if you have any links to some educational materials that we should know about, or if there's a place that has, for instance, sample basic dietary eating plans. And I already did link to your website as well as fordwellness.com. Are there any other good sources that you would recommend?
Yeah, I love, let's see, I think it's ifm.org, or it might be ifm.org, ifm.org, the Institute of Functional Medicine. They have a link on there that is, I'm looking at it now, news and research. So it's ifm.org/news-insights. And so on there are all these different research based articles that they have that talk about a lot of the stuff we have been talking about. I'm looking at one that says Healthy Aging and Longevity, Staying Young Forever with Mark Hyman, MD. So so that can definitely be a good resource for everyone too.
Yes, excellent. And I have displayed this on the screen, so I appreciate that. And in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to pose one question from one of our viewers, Daniel Tweed, and then we can go to your closing statement. So Daniel wonders about the Wim Hof method and your thoughts on it. So this has to do with like immersion in cold water, and it's alleged to have some benefits for longevity. But I wonder what you think of that.
I think if your body can tolerate it, it is wonderful. There's lots of research that links cold exposure to longevity, and even I read something the other day saying that people that live in cold climates around the world tend to live slightly longer than people who live in warm climates. Very interesting.
I can add a little feedback to that. My weight was down to 208 last year around October, and I was doing a lot of cold showering. But as it got colder, it increased my appetite, and I gained a bunch of weight, and that could be a side effect from cold immersion. I hear is you will gain weight in order your body to respond to kind of sort of insulate itself. So just be aware of that.
It definitely increases your metabolic rate. So that could be a thing too. Like, your faster metabolism might prompt some people to want to eat more as well.
Yes, quite interesting. And again, multifaceted set of considerations if one wishes to engage in that kind of approach. So thank you very much, Jonene, for joining us for nearly 2 hours. And in the last 2.5 minutes, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make some closing remarks. What would you like to say that could perhaps take this discussion further or sum it up and essentially give our audience some parting thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me at the salon, and just kind of considering that healthspan is multifaceted, and when we address all the things, then we're more likely to achieve the goal that we want, which is a longer life, but making that long life healthy. So I would say that's my thing. That's my closing thing.
Yes, indeed. And of course, that is a goal that we all very much share at the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Our first core ideal is the support of significant life extension through the progress of science and technology, but anything would help, including good lifestyle choices. So we definitely encourage our viewers to look into all of the possible areas that were discussed today, including nutrition, including good exercise habits, as well as supplementation if that is what you need, and essentially maximize the time that you have in a good, healthy state so that longevity, escape velocity will be within reach for you. And you may have noticed we have had more salons this year dedicated to healthy longevity. And in particular, as we hopefully emerge out of this pandemic, there will be an increased focus on this, as Dr. Jonene Ford mentioned, and this will benefit our broader society. So thank you to Dr. Jonene Ford. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. As always, an excellent virtual Enlightenment Salon. And until next time, let us all live long and prosper.